A reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verses 17 to 22. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. The word of the Lord.
Thanks, Linda. Well, like I mentioned, because we're a brand new church plant, there are lots of you who are sort of coming back to church, maybe for the first time, or exploring Christianity. And if you've read the news at all, if you follow some of the religious news like I do, you see that there's a little bit of a revival, people sort of really wanting to explore faith. But therefore, I think for us, it becomes really important that we get really clear on what Christianity is all about. Because if we went around this room and we asked, what do you think Christianity is about? I think we get tons of different answers. Because there are a lot of misunderstandings about what Christianity really is. I think most people probably think that Christianity is all about a set of rules that you got to follow so that God will accept you and maybe that therefore you'll go to heaven. And that's sort of the popular understanding of what Christianity or maybe any religion really is. But from the Bible standpoint, that's really not what Christianity is all about. You know, Christianity is principally a vision for all of life, every single area of your life, to live as it was always meant to be in relationship with the God that made you so that you can most flourish. Or in other words, Christianity is all about helping you become truly human, living the way that God has always intended for you to live in relationship with Him. And I think that very idea is really needed for us today because in our society, there are lots of questions and confusion as to what does it mean to be truly human, right? Like with the rise of AI and technology that are doing things that are way better at it than what human beings could do, it's pushing the question forward as to what does it mean to be truly human? And I think when you look around at society, it's no secret that we're also struggling in lots of different areas. And maybe, again, you're here because you're struggling in some key area. And I think a part of that is because we don't really have a comprehensive vision for what a flourishing life ought to look like. And maybe that's what you want. Let alone, how do we actually live that kind of a life? So that's why this fall, for the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at the book of Exodus. And we're going to be looking at how people are truly formed to be truly human. And so just as Linda read, we're going to start in the beginning part of Exodus, and we're going to start tracking with the Israelites' journey after being rescued from Egypt under the hand of Pharaoh when they were once slaves for 430 plus years. And we're going to see how God now forms His people to live the kind of life that they were always meant to live, learning to be truly human under God. And as one writer said, it took 4 days to rescue Israel out of Egypt, but then it takes 40 years in the wilderness to get the Egypt out of Israel. Right? There is this formation that is happening, this spiritual formation that God is after that helps Israel and will help us to understand the basics of what life with God is meant to be and sort of the basics of what human life is meant to look like. And so the wilderness pilgrimage that the Israelites take that we're going to track with sort of becomes a template for any Christian life. And I think it'll be hopefully a really rewarding series for us to go to because a lot of you might have just some really simple, basic questions as to what does it mean to follow God? What is my life supposed to look like? That's exactly the story that the Israelites are going through. And in our passage, we read right at the beginning of when Israel gets freed under Pharaoh and now is starting to be led by God. And we're going to learn a lot about what it means to actually follow God and not anything else. So let's look at this passage, this short, brief passage, by looking at three different things. First, let's look at the fact that we were made to follow, that's inherent in who we are, that we're made to follow. Then we'll look at what is it like actually following God? What does that look and feel like? And then thirdly, we'll ask why we can actually trust and follow God. So let's look at how we're made to follow, what it's like following God, and why we can. So first, like I said, we're starting kind of in Exodus chapter 13. So we sort of skipped the first quarter of Exodus. And so here's a quick summary as to what happened up until this point in the book of Exodus. For 430 years, God's people, the Israelites, were oppressed as slaves, treated very, very harshly under the hand of Pharaoh. And during that time, as you can imagine, the Israelites, God's people that had this incredible promise that God had always given to them, they had forgotten all about who they were. They had forgotten all about the God who had promised to rescue them. But the thing that we see is that God never forgot about them. And so he raises up this leader, Moses, as you may have heard of him, to deliver Israelites from the hand of Pharaoh. And this is coming right on that back end of the 10 plagues, right? So through these miraculous 10 plagues, Pharaoh finally lets go of Israel and says, you can finally go. Moses says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, finally, yes, you can take them out of here, get them out of here. And that's really right when we're picking up the story in chapter 13, starting in verse 17, when Pharaoh is just letting the people of God go, and now God is the one that starts leading them on and leading them forward. Which means this: all throughout this entire time, Israel was following or was under the rule of Pharaoh. And now God is saying to them, I'm not only saving you from your former master, but I'm saving you so that now you can follow me. I'm going to free you and now lead you to the life that you had always imagined, to the promised land, or the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey, which sounds incredible if you've been a slave for 430 plus years. That is what God is promising to them. And that's where we pick up our story. And the first thing that I want us to notice is this. Obviously, God is saving Israel from a very, very terrible position, right? Slavery and oppression is never how anyone is ever supposed to live. So God frees them from that, but here's the thing. He doesn't then say, okay, now go off and live however you want, right? It's not a freedom for them to live however they want. That's not what the kind of freedom or liberation that God is offering. And that's something that we have to make explicit, because the modern idea of what we think freedom is, this key cultural value, is we usually define freedom as an absence of restraints. I need to have the freedom to do whatever I want. I want unlimited choices. That is what true freedom is. I don't want any kind of external constraints, whether it's from the government, whether it's from institutions or tradition. And true freedom in our modern sense means I get to pave whatever kind of road that I want. I get to express whatever it is without any kind of constraints. That's what we typically think freedom is. The Bible, and particularly the book of Exodus, is big on this narrative and theme of liberation and freedom, but it is nothing like the freedom that our modern world talks about. It is not a freedom from constraints, but the Bible talks about what true freedom is, and it is a freedom for. See, real freedom is not the absence of constraints, but it is choosing the right constraints to live in a way that offers you the maximum amount of the abundant life that you were meant for. It is choosing the right ones to help you flourish. Right? So the classic example of this is a fish. Right? If a fish says, I want unlimited freedom, and it pops out of that water onto dry land, what's going to happen to that fish? It's going to die very, very quickly, right? No, the fish is most free when it's constrained to the water in which it was made for. The same thing is true of us. And so God is saving Israel from being under Pharaoh for a relationship with him. The relationship that God's people and all people were ultimately made for. That is where true freedom is ultimately going to be found. And as we journey through this narrative of Exodus, that's the same journey that we're going to keep tracking with, that God is reforming his people for the life that they were made for, ultimately with him. That is what it means to be truly human. Another way to say that is to sort of make this obvious point that we're just made to follow. We're not made to be utterly independent, autonomous, and on our own, living without restraints. It is baked into our human nature to follow something or someone, to be compelled towards something or someone. You realize that all of our identity formation, you know how it typically happens? It's through imitation. It's through looking at, following, repeating certain kinds of actions. We are master reflectors. See, no one is ever totally independent. No one gets formed in that kind of a way. And you might not think this of yourself, but every single person here, we all follow something, principles, rules, tradition, cultural narratives, a particular kind of person, a particular kind of lifestyle that you're looking for. You are following after something, and whatever that something is, it is absolutely shaping the kind of people that we are becoming. See, we are constantly being formed in our characters, whether we like it or not. It's not a matter of if you and I are being formed. It is a matter of what is the thing that is forming us. And it's going to be the thing that we are following and looking to. And just think about this, right? Think about the history of Israel, of the Israelites for 430 years being under the hand of Pharaoh, living subjugated as slaves. Think about how that would have utterly shaped them to be a kind of person full of fear. And today, in our modern world, it is absolutely doing the same thing. It is constantly forming us, mostly in a lot of unhealthy ways. Right? The things that we spend our time watching or listening to or scrolling on is absolutely forming us and shaping us. The things that we follow, the people that we follow are absolutely forming us. And it's usually not for our best. It's not for our flourishing. That's why mental health is on the rise. I don't know of anyone who looks out into the world and says, we are a really flourishing, beautiful kind of people. Do we ever say that? No, we say we are a really divisive and polarized kind of people. We say we are a really ugly kind of people. And here in the city, we're formed to be an overworking, burned out kind of people. We're constantly being formed. And again, this is baked into our nature. Here's a quote from a Christian psychologist Kurt Thompson. He says this. He says, "We all come into the world looking for someone looking for us." We all come into the world looking for someone that's looking for us. And so the studies that he's done is sort of looked at attachment theory and neuroscience that happens ever since you are an infant, a newborn baby. That makes this case that we're always looking to follow and imitate something to be formed. And he says that infants, when they're born, they're literally seeking out eyes and faces of their caregivers. And when a baby sees someone that is seeing them and hopefully smiling back at them, their neural pathways of safety, trust, and identity are being formed. That's what's happening in a baby. It makes this point that we are creatures by design that's meant to be seen and mirrored and held in the gaze of another. We're looking, we're following, and we're being shaped. And friends, let's not be so foolish as to think that that's only true of babies. This never stops. This continues on into every single adult human being. We are all constantly looking for someone or something to follow for our safety, for our significance, for our identity formation, to tell us, is this good or bad? Is this right or wrong? That never ever stops because we're made to follow. So here's a question for us this morning. What is that for you? What is the thing that you are looking to or following that is shaping who are you becoming? What are the narratives, the stories, the personalities that you are following and being formed by? And what kind of person is that making you? Are you flourishing or are you struggling? And here's what God says to that. He's saying that looking to it, because you're made for me, he says, if you look to follow anything else, it will never give you the thing that you are looking for. If you look to anything to follow besides me, you will ultimately still be under slavery or oppression, after the wrong kind of master, and that is why we struggle. That is why our lives don't look great when we're only filled with TikToks and Instagrams. But God is saying, but now with the Israelites, he's saying, I'm now going to free you to follow me, to learn what it means to live in a relationship that's with a very, very different kind of a master than any other master in this world and any other kind of leader that this world can ever give to you. Because God is saying, I am your true caregiver that you're meant to be attached to and be in relationship with. I am the true person that you are to look to and receive real safety, real significance, and real identity formation. All of that because we're made to follow. But here's the second point that I want to move us to. If we can get to agree on that. The second point is, what does it then look like if and when we do follow God? And this is what brings us to our passage. Starting in verse 17, here's what it says. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. And so God led the people around by the desert toward the Red Sea. Now, I was trying to find a map that I could throw this up there, but I just didn't have the time. But if you look at the map, the path from where they are in Egypt to Canaan, the promised land, if you really took the shortest direct route along the sea, it's about 250 miles. So the Israelites could have journeyed there in like just under 4 weeks if they took the shortest route. But that's not really what they do. Instead, we read throughout the book of Exodus and Numbers and Leviticus and Deuteronomy that the Israelites wander around in the wilderness for another 40 years instead of getting there in 4 weeks. Now, some of you might be thinking right in this moment, this is the exact reason why I'm not following God. My man is not efficient, and we hate inefficiency. He's going the wrong way. God, Canaan's this way. Why are we going that way? You must not know what you are doing. And the moment that God does anything that we can't make sense of, what do we typically do? Is we take the reins right back. And part of that is our formation because we don't know what it's like to trust God and to follow him wherever he calls. That very sense that we have of like, why in the world would you possibly do that, God? Is the very thing that shows us how malformed we are and how used to control that we have. And that is also why it's very hard to follow God, because he doesn't act the way that we want. And so therefore, today, people are not following God because of these kinds of questions that rise up in our hearts. And do you know what people are looking to and following instead? Do you know what the biggest thing that's on the rise is? Is artificial intimacy. ChatGPT, Claude, all of these technologies are offering a kind of spiritual direction, therapy, counseling, and relationship. That is one of the fastest growing uses and use cases of ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, what people are now calling artificial intimacy. Because here's the thing, it is really attractive what AI can give to us. It is really attractive because it gives us what we think, everything that we want, right? The kind of direction that we need in our lives without asking anything of us. See, AI is very safe, it is very, very private, and it is wicked smart. It is so hyper capable. And all you need to do is pull up a browser and type in whatever you want, ask any kind of question without feeling any sort of vulnerability at all. And so people are flocking to it because people are desperate for direction and they don't know where to go. And they're going to something like this that really risks nothing. And the reason why it risks nothing is because it's not a real relationship. You see, the problem with artificial intimacy is that it is, at the end of the day, it is only a reflection or it's only a mirror of human culture. In fact, all of the large language models, it's basically this perfect reflection of everything human culture has ever produced. It's able to give it to you in a millisecond, which means all that it possibly is a mirror that can reflect back same patterns that we're always used to. Which is why it's not a real relationship, because it's predictable. And do you know what the number one reason why AI is not a real relationship is? Because it always gives us what we want. You know, what's one of the big things that's on the rise is AI boyfriends and girlfriends. And guess which one is on the rise more? AI girlfriends, because AI gives you exactly what you want and listens to you all the time. Even in my chat GPT, of course I use it. And every time I challenge her to ask a different question, you know what it always responds with? Yes, you're right. Wonderful thought. So compelling. It's learned to give me exactly what it is that I want for me to continue to use it. AI has taken out the risk of being in a real relationship that really does require vulnerability and trust. That's what's at the heart of a real relationship is. There is no real pushback. There is no real unpredictability with it because there is no real presence with AI. And therefore, it can never really give us the thing that we deeply need: to be seen, to be known, to be held, to be in true relationship. But following God is utterly different. So completely different than that. God is the farthest thing from a mirror or a chatbot that gives you exactly what you want. No, in fact, he's God. He's a God that can do whatever he wants. And he, in fact, does whatever he wants. He is a real person, living being that you cannot coerce and that you cannot control. And that's the very thing that makes it really risky and afraid of following him, being in a relationship with him. Because it requires trust. It requires faith. Here's a great quote from Andy Crouch, who's thought a lot about this stuff. He says this: "Following God involves engaging with a living, unpredictable being who does not provide expected or formulaic answers. That requires trust and a willingness to be led into unknown and transformative experiences." He calls this a sacred unpredictability of God, the sacred unpredictability of God. And that has to be the case because that's the only way that human beings will actually change. And that's the very thing that he is doing here in the book of Exodus as he's leading Israel out into the wilderness. And this is what we can learn in how and what following God looks like. And if we too want to learn in following him, here are some key principles that we're going to have to see and learn from this text for us to apply and always have in our relationship with God. Here's the first thing that we see based on what he's doing here in this passage. One is this: God is not primarily concerned with changing our circumstances or taking you to your final destination. Otherwise, he would have taken the shortest route. Otherwise, he would have just teleported them to Canaan. Here's all the milk and honey that you want. That's not what he does, because that's not what he's most concerned with. What he's most concerned with is growing your relationship with him and changing you to love and trust him more. That is what he is principally concerned with. And the reason for that is that he is really out for our true rescue. Right? Saving Israel just out of the context of slavery is not a true rescue. That is just a displacement. He is not wanting to save Israel just from the circumstances of slavery and oppression. He's wanting to renew and change their entire mindset about it. Again, it took the 4 days to get the Israel out of Egypt, but it took 40 years in the wilderness to get that Egypt, that kind of way of being formed as slaves, out of Israel. And God is saying, I'm out for your true rescue and for your real spiritual formation, a freedom for a relationship with him where you will truly flourish. And I don't care if it takes 40 years of wandering in the wilderness to do it. That's the first thing we see. But here's the second thing that we see, is that this God, not only can he do whatever he wants, but he's the only one that is truly qualified to lead us. Because he knows much more than us, and he knows us better than we know ourselves. We read in our passage that one of the reasons why we see and we kind of get like an inside glimpse as to the thinking of what God is saying, that says, if they go to the Philistines and these guys are going to attack us, they're a very powerful army. And the moment that the Israelites face this sort of opposition, their hearts are going to be scared. They're going to turn back and they're going to want to go right back to Egypt. If they face war, he knows that at the first sight of trouble, Israel will want to go back. God knows that. And here's the thing that we learn from that. Not only is he qualified, but as we learn to trust him and follow him, here's what we're going to experience. You and I are going to experience our true humanity and just how vulnerable we really are and how much we are in need of someone like God to lead us. You see, when you actually use things like ChatGPT, what it does is it makes you actually feel like a mini God. right? It makes you feel more protected, more secure, because at the push of a finger, you can get all the information that you want. But when you follow God into the unknown, you will utterly feel your inherent vulnerability. And that's what it really means to be human. You see, friends, in this life, the wilderness that we live in, there are many things that are going to come our way that we do not have the resources to deal with on our own. That is an inevitable fact. And here in New York City, we try to live as if we've got it all together and that we're super capable and that we really are in control. And in fact, many of us try to do whatever we can to remain in control until something like a cancer diagnosis hits, or something so big, so powerful, much bigger than you comes into your life that you can do nothing about. And you get a dose of reality that you were never in control, that you were always this vulnerable, whether you knew it or not. Following God allows us to understand that and to look to Him, the one who's qualified to lead us and protect us in that. And here's the third thing that we learn as an implication of all those things in following God, is that He is always out for our ultimate good, even when we don't see it, even when it doesn't look like it. He is always out for our ultimate good. See, this is a gift that we get in this text, that we get a little bit of a sneak preview of why God doesn't choose to take Israel straight to the Philistine country. And I wish I could press a button to be like, God, what were you thinking right here? That would make it a lot easier to follow you, right? Israelites didn't know that. But He loves us. Not only does God know more than us, but He also loves us more than we could ever love ourselves, more than we could ever be imagined being loved. And that is why He will not let Israel go back to Egypt no matter what. He wants them to thrive. He loves them too much to do that, and He knows that He can actually deliver on His promise to take them through a kind of a wilderness that will bring Him home to Him. He knows what's best. And He's always out for our good. See, those are some of the three things that we have to know and trust for us to want to and actually give up control and follow God. If you don't trust those things, then it'll be way too hard to give up control. And that's the very journey that God is taking Israel on and will take us on as we look at the travel through the wilderness. He's growing us to have faith and trust in Him even when it doesn't make sense to you. To be open to this sacred unpredictability of God that can actually transform us and bring us into a thriving relationship with Him. So that's what it's like following God. And maybe you're here and you're like, I'm actually not sold. I don't know if I can really do that because it's really scary to follow this kind of a God. I'd rather stick to my ChatGPT or my Claude chatbot. And I won't blame you because that is a very scary thing to actually open yourself up to what God is going to do. But here's why we actually can. And here's our final and much shorter third point. Here's why you actually can follow God. Look with me on verse 21 and 22. Here's what it says. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to guide them by light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud or by day, nor the pillar of cloud fire by night left its place in front of the people. Neither of those things ever left its place in front of this people. Now, theologians call this a theophany, right? This is sort of a physical manifestation of the presence of God before the people of God. So there was one earlier on in Exodus 3, the burning bush, if you've heard of that story, right? That's another theophany. It's sort of this physical manifestation of the very presence of God. And this theophany in particular served a very important purpose, especially to a people who've been subjugated to slavery for 430 plus years, who did not know what it was like to follow and trust this kind of a God. They needed assurances that God was really going to be with them and that He could really be trusted. You know, it's kind of like Israel is like that infant that's looking for the face that's looking for them in order to see and experience a sense of security and safety in order for their identity to be formed. And this pillar of cloud and fire for them was the very proof that the God who had delivered them, that was powerful enough to deliver them and overcome the hand of Pharaoh, this mighty warrior who freed them, was also now with them and the very God that was leading them. It was his presence, this theophany, this manifestation of his presence that gave the Israelites the kind of comfort that they needed for this journey to follow. And we read that it never left its place in front of the people. See, God's presence is really the thing that is actually changing Israel. Because God is teaching them not to look to the things, the milk and honey of the promised land or a change in circumstances. But what is he doing as he is leading them? He is teaching them to find their comfort and their hope in his presence with them right there in the wilderness in the moment. God's presence was a reminder to the heart, the frail, fickle, scared, anxious heart of Israel, that the same God who had saved them is also with them because he loves them. That is the only thing that can change their slavery mindset under Pharaoh. And that is the only thing that can transform them to be a people who love and trust and willingly follow this God that they're made for. There's God's presence that heals them. But what about for us? What assurances do we have that God's presence is ever with us, that he loves us, that he can be trusted for us to follow, that he is out for our ultimate good? Because I got to be real with you too, it's hard to follow God, especially when circumstances in life are very difficult. And we don't have that voice speaking into saying, here's why I'm doing this, friend. Here's why I'm doing this for you. Trust me. I've got you. I love you. We don't have that audible voice. And so it becomes really hard to follow God. So what assurances do we have? What about us? Well, friends, I need us to see this. That we've got so much more. We've got so much more than a pillar of cloud and fire that appears. Because that theophany was only pointing to God's ultimate answer and proof. That he will always be with his people. That he will always do whatever it takes to truly and fully rescue his people. To show them that he is with them and that he loves them. And of course, that theophany is pointing to none other than Jesus Christ, who is called Emmanuel, that is God with us. And this is not a God who comes down just to be with us, but this is a God who goes before us to the places that we could never go in order to truly rescue us, dying the death that we should have died for following after everything else other than God. We should have been led off of a cliff for our judgment, seeking our fulfillment in everything but him. And yet in his great love and his grace for you and I, he comes and he bears the worst kind of judgment that we could ever bear by dying the death that we should have died on the cross. And you see, if you're ever questioning, how can I trust that I can follow Jesus with my life, whatever path he takes me? All you need to do is look at the cross. Because that is the place where he proves to us once and for all that he truly is out for our ultimate rescue. That Jesus is the only one who is qualified to lead, willing to go to the depths of our sin and darkness and brokenness to redeem us and make us his. And that is also the place where we can always be reassured that he is always out for our ultimate good. That even in the face of tragedy, even in the face of death, we can be assured that he is working all things out for the good of those who love and trust him. Because that's what he does on the cross. The moment that everybody scattered and ran away and thinking that God had been defeated was the very moment that God's greatest enemies and our greatest enemies was ultimately defeated by what Christ has done. You were made for a relationship to this God, to this Jesus who's died for you. And following him is the only way that we can get all that we desire in this life. But only if we're willing to trust and follow and give our lives looking to him, being formed by him to become more like him.